KPMG. Joe has been involved in XBRL for quite some time. We're very happy to have you here with us today, Joe. Joe is going to give an introduction. He's going to cover duplicates, signs, and dimensions. We're then going to take a couple of CPE questions. So for those of you who are getting CPE credit, please make sure to respond to the questions. And if for some reason you forgot to actually sign up for CPE, you can go ahead and answer those questions, and we can still get you CPE credit at the end. Okay, after the CPE questions, we're going to turn it over to Steve Horowitz. Steve is Manager of Technical Services and Web Applications at NovaWorks. NovaWorks is an XBRL US member, as is KPMG. And Steve is going to cover transformations, exclusions, and continuations, and also talk a bit about hidden tags. We'll close by covering a couple of CPE questions, and then talk a little bit about upcoming events and other programs available to you from XBRL US. Just a few technical points. If you have any problems as we're going through the presentation, problem with hearing or seeing the visuals, please send us an email at support, S-U-P-P-O-R-T, @xbrl.us, and we will get you back online. And also, as we go through the program, if you have questions, just click on the QA link that you see at the top of your screen, and we'll receive those questions and take them at various points during the program. So with that, I want to thank everybody for joining, and I am now going to stop sharing my screen, and I'm going to turn it over to Joe Luchka, who's going to get us started on our program today.
Great, thank you, Michelle. With that, welcome everybody to today's presentation, and while I go into slide mode here. So what I'd like to do is, before we get started, is I want to give you a little bit of overview of what to expect for the next 50 minutes or so. This is one of several in a series presented by XBRL US to help issuers understand the differences between traditional XBRL and Inline. Today's session is going to have a few more examples and a little bit more detail from a technical standpoint as to what you can expect as to be the differences between your traditional XBRL and your inline XBRL for the normal English speaking language. So what we're going to do is we're going to give you a short introduction here as to kind of the SEC rule with respect to inline. I'll take over the next couple of sections, and as Michelle mentioned, we'll have some CPE credits, and Steve will do the rest of that, and we're available for questions as well. To just kind of give you the overview, in terms of the adoption of inline XBRL, there is a phased-in approach for this. So large accelerated filers will start with their first fiscal period ending on or after June 15th, 2019. But that first fiscal period is generally going to be a 10Q. So for those of you who might be a 10K filer for June 30th, you have a reprieve until September. Anyone can early adopt if they so choose. Accelerated filers will start with their first fiscal period ending on or after June 15th, 2020, with the rest of the issuers out there starting in their first fiscal period after June 15th, 2021. And again, the requirement is that all filers will comply beginning with their Q. Earlier adoption, though, is allowable. So what are some of the requirements? Well, aside from changing from traditional XBRL to inline, there are no changes for operating companies with respect to the timing of the submission. For mutual funds, however, the 15-day business filing day period, if you want to call it the contingency or the delay, is eliminated for mutual fund filers. There are some special requirements for initial registration statements, for post-effective amendments and prospectuses. If you fall into that last category, I would ask that you take a look at the rule and discuss with your filing agent and also with your legal counsel what your requirements are. Why is inline perceived to be better? We've been talking the last several years about inline and how it's going to be the next evolution of XBRL. And inline is perceived to be better. So one inline document may have a higher data quality because it's easier to see on screen what you're tagging and how it is tagged. A separate XBRL exhibit may increase the likelihood of inconsistent data because you've got two separate files that you need to keep in sync. Sometimes when changes are made to one file, they may or may not be made to the other file consistently. One of the challenges we've always had with XBRL has been the concept of the rendering and how important is the rendering, and should the rendering match exactly to what we have on our paper or PDF financial statements, or should it be more tuned to the concepts included in XBRL? Well, because of the rendering, we found that certain filers or issuers may include additional or unnecessary tags in an effort to make the rendering look like the official filing. One of the comments that I make to many of the companies that I work with on XBRL is that XBRL is intended to be machine read by software that can then be uploaded to a database and analyzed by consumers of the XBRL data. So don't worry about what it looks like in a rendering or what it looks like, on a paper printout. Look and be concerned about how it is tagged and whether it's tagged accurately, so that consumers and the software that consumers use can interpret the tags correctly. We also have heard about Inline would give the preparer better control over the presentation of the disclosures. So that also is true in that because you're tagging something as it appears, you have a little bit better control over making sure that a human reader could see the document in PDF and that it could be properly presented in an electronic format. We also have heard the rumors that Inline will reduce cost. My personal opinion is it does in some cases. In some cases, it may increase the cost. However, the best way to find out is to move to Inline. I will tell you that the experiences that I've talked to my clients about has been a net positive benefit of moving to Inline. It eliminates the effort to create a separate document and reduces the review time, as there is only one document to then review when your changes are made late in the process. I would say that certain tables, and I'll talk about this when I get to the section on dimensions, are more difficult to review in Inline. But as a whole, again, the net benefit is that Inline will reduce your review time. So what's changed? Just from a technical standpoint, the instance document is no longer required to be submitted as a separate document. Typically, we have attached several files as an exhibit, and those several files have been typically the link bases, the schema document, and the instance document itself. When you move to Inline, your software tool will create one document, and we call it the XHTML, that will include both your presentation document, your formerly PDF, and the actual tagging. When you upload this to the SEC's website, their portal will create an extracted instance document and post it alongside your files on the SEC website available for download. It could also be viewed in the new iXBRL viewer that was available from the SEC and has some neat features that allow you to better see and understand some of the facts in your document and how they are tagged. Last thing, which is a minor point here, the website posting requirement has been eliminated. So now you're no longer required to post those exhibit files on your website. We found that this was generally not needed since most consumers of the data would either get the data from the SEC website from an RSS feed or from some other service that was consuming the data and making it available to them in a different format. What stays the same? We're still going to use the same company-specific extension taxonomy as traditional XBRL, the schema file. The presentation link base is still required. Label requirements have not changed. Captions are still required to match face financial statements. And it's still very important to make sure we use the right labels when we define our facts in our report. That helps software used by consuming agents to properly interpret whether something is a total, where it's the start or the end of a period, or whether the sign has been flipped through a negated label. And again, all calculation requirements are still in effect, no changes there. When I kind of liken it when I talk to people is 95% of your instance document preparation is going to stay the same. In that remaining 5%, we have some new tags that we need to be concerned about, and we'll cover those in the rest of this session today. And we have a few things that are going to be handled a little bit differently, such as some of the transformations and continuations, which we'll talk about today as well. So now when we talk about really what are some of the categories of items that are different? One of the first ones that we talk about is duplicate amounts. Under traditional XBRL, as we were talking about some of the, if you want to call it some of the nuances of XBRL, when we had duplicate amounts in traditional XBRL, we could typically only tag those items once. So if you had an amount that was, say, reported on your balance sheet, and it was 47,735,000, and you had that same amount that was reported in, say, a footnote, it might be reported as 47.2 billion. Well, those are theoretically the same accounting concept and the same disclosure, but they might be presented at different levels of precision based on how they're presented in a columnar format on your balance sheet or in a text format in one of your footnotes. In traditional XBRL, we would tag that fact once at the lower level of precision. When we move to Inline, because we're actually tagging the amounts in a presentation of your financials, we don't have that ability to tag it just once. We'd have to tag it in both occurrences. So that sometimes results in duplicate amounts, where we have, again, the 47.2 or 47,235 in your balance sheet, and the 47 that appears in your footnote. Well, there are a couple different kinds of duplicates. One would be an exact match. One would be a consistent match, where it's the same value, but it could be rounded to a lower level or higher level of precision. And one would be inconsistent, which normally indicates an error. And we're going to talk about that in a minute too. When should filers use duplicate amounts? Well, I gave you the one example, and I'm going to show you on the next screen as well, is in some cases, we might have an amount that is presented both on a balance sheet and in a footnote. In this case, we have derivative assets, 43,725,000,000 are on the balance sheet, where 43.7, a rounded value, is included in the text in the footnote. Tagging these under Inline XBRL, you would tag each one separately, and they would be tagged differently, again, because you have a different level of rounding or level of precision here. This would be one of those that I just called as consistent, where it could be a rounded value. There are opportunities where an error has been made in the financial statements in the tagging, and you have something that is inconsistent. And this could be a result of something that happens from perhaps updating a value in the face financials and having a different value in the footnotes, or perhaps having a different concept or different disclosure someplace else where we use the same tag, but it really shouldn't have been the same. So these inconsistent duplicates, you can see here, are going to be shown as an error. When you upload your instance document to the to the SEC website, the portal will run some basic validation, and to the extent that it finds duplicate facts with inconsistent amounts, those will be reported as an error. Inconsistent duplicates could result in your filing being rejected by the SEC portal. It's important to run either test validations prior to uploading your final file, or to use vendor-supplied software to check for these types of errors. But this is one of those things that is new to Inline, would not have been allowed under traditional XBRL, and could potentially present a problem. So make sure you change your process for review to include some type of either review or check for inconsistent duplicate amounts. Let's move on to the next topic here, which is dimensions. First off, I want to stress that dimensions in Inline XBRL are exactly the same as they were under traditional XBRL. There's no change in the way you would tag or apply dimensions to your financial statement facts. The only difference is the way that they're displayed and the way that you might review them. I made the statement earlier that, generally speaking, reviewing Inline is faster and easier than reviewing traditional XBRL. Dimensions are one area with a little bit of complexity that might actually require a little bit more time. On the next couple slides, I'll show you some examples, but in general, dimensions are used to add additional detail or information to data. If we look at this in our instance document creation software, different software tools have different ways of presenting dimensions and allowing you to do your review. When you actually apply dimensions to an inline document and present it in an inline document, one of the things that you'll see is that when you hover over a particular item that has a dimension on it, it shows up in that particular if you want to call it that little bubble or that little fact window that explodes out from the values. So you'll see here that there's an axis and a member assigned to this column of values for Lennar Home Building. And this happens to be for their business segments axis. So if you were to go value by value and to look at the dimensions in this format, it might be a little bit more time consuming. If you were to do something different and say, let's look at our columnar approach here, you could use the axes filter in the Inline browser provided for by the SEC that will allow you to filter. And by choosing to use these filters, you can then select specific members or specific, in this case, segments to review one at a time to help improve your readability and your review process. Using other third-party software, sometimes segments and members can be presented as columnar information, which makes it a little bit easier to review and a little bit faster to review. To the extent that you have simple tables with few dimensions, viewing them in the XBRL or iXBRL browser is an easy way to do it. Sometimes using your creation software would be a simple way to do it. Sometimes for more complicated tables with lots of dimensionality to them, you may wish to use a third-party tool that has a more columnar approach to help you better identify which values are assigned to which members and to find an easier, more efficient way to review. This is not a reason to not adopt Inline XBRL. This is something to be aware of and to be considered when you start looking at your review process and how you intend to go through your Inline XBRL to make sure that you are able to clearly identify which values relate to which members and to make sure that they tie to your financials. Again, not a difference because of Inline XBRL, but something that could impact your review process. Like any of the things that we talk about today with Inline XBRL, I urge you to talk to your vendors that provide your tagging software or that do your tagging for you, as they may have already dealt with some of these issues and might have some tips, some techniques, or additional software that's available to help you through your process. Moving to Inline should not become a less efficient process. It could become a more efficient process when you understand all the differences and the tools available to you. Moving on, I'd like to talk about the next section here, which has to do with signs. Again, signs don't really change with Inline. However, depending on the software tool that you use, and some of the software tools out there now make a clearer, if you want to call it, a linkage to the presentation and to the PDF or HTML financial statements. In doing that, you may have already solved some of these issues. People who might use a more traditional tagging software that is not as, if you want to call it, HTML sensitive or document centered, you might have differences in the way you have reviewed the signs to make sure that the positive and negative values are not masked by the negating labels. So signs are an area in Inline XBRL that you might want to pay a little bit more attention to in your review process to make sure you clearly understand how your tagging software is presenting them, to make sure that positive signs and negative signs as they relate to the XBRL and the underlying values is clearly understood as you go through your review process. When should filers use positive amounts versus negative amounts? Again, the existing guidance still stays. This is simply a rather unusual nuance with your software. Moving on to the next, I'm going to give you an example here. And we've actually showed you the code here. But one of the things to be aware of is that as you hover over some of the items in your financial statement in an Inline XBRL enabled browser, you'll see that the facts that appear may have a different sign. In this case, this one is tagged as a negative value because that is the sign convention for this particular element. However, in the presentation of the XHTML, you'll see that it is a positive value. Again, not a significant difference related to Inline XBRL, simply something to be aware of as you conduct your review process and to make sure you clearly understand what is the underlying value? Is it positive or negative, and does it go consistent with the balance type and the tag definition that you're using? With that, I'm going to turn it back to Michelle. I think she's got a CPE credit for you.
Great, Joe. Thank you very much. Yeah, and I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. Okay. And we're going to go through a couple of quick CPE questions, and then I'll be turning it over to Steve. But let's start with our first poll question. Okay, so the first question, hopefully you should be able to see this on the screen right now. And the question is, in the SEC rule for inline XBRL, accelerated filers must begin complying starting with 3 options: their first fiscal period ending on or after June 15th, 2019, or their first fiscal period ending on or after June 15th, 2020, or their first fiscal period ending on or after June 15th, 2022. So you've got about another 20 seconds or so. If you could just take a look at the answers and respond to the one that you think is most appropriate. And we typically get the CPE certificates out to you, I think within a couple of weeks. So you can expect that for those of you who are getting CPE credit. Okay, I'm going to close down the polling here in just a second. Okay. All right, we're going to go on to the next question. Okay, what has changed with the new inline XBRL rule? And there are 3 options. There are changes in the timing of XBRL submission for operating companies. The instance document is no longer required to be submitted as a separate document, or filers must continue to post their XBRL document on their website. Which is the appropriate answer to what has changed with the new inline XBRL rule? We'll have got about another 30 seconds here. Okay, and just as another little reminder as we go through this, if you do have questions, you can click on the Q&A link at the top of your screen and submit questions, and we'll take them as they come in. Okay, I'm going to close down the polling now. All right, and we have 2 additional polls. We'll get to those after Steve gives his session. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing. I'm going to turn it over to Steve Horowitz from NoteWorks.
Thanks, Michelle. Just going to share my screen and we can take a look at continuations. Okay. So continuations are a new concept introduced with Inline XBRL. They're not actually part of the XBRL information that's being tagged, but they are required to present the information correctly. With traditional XBRL, you would take a block of text and tag it as a text block element. And you could stitch together as many of those as you want in whatever order you wanted because it was completely separate from your instance document. Now, with Inline XBRL, because it's not a separate document anymore, these are inline tags and they have to be nested properly, meaning you can't have overlapping blocks of text. So you can't have, say, a single paragraph that's included within 2 text blocks without using continuations. So we have to introduce this new concept to handle that. If we look at my example on the next page here, we can see an example of overlapping text. If we want this note to history and organization of the company to appear in both our text block 1 and text block 2, we would have to tag text block 1, highlighted in this teal color, with one set of tags. We could tag the text block 2, the overlapping portion here, in a continuation. And we could tag, actually, no, we would tag the note 1 basic presentation in teal as a text block. We would tag the note 2 here as a block in purple. And this red block will be a continuation of the note 2 history and organization of the company. This is allowing us to stitch together different blocks of text to make facts. Now, this is just something you wouldn't have had to do before because you could just do it without even really thinking about it by putting fact values in. But it's a new feature of Inline XBRL to allow you to tag things without having to have separate documents. Another way we can go ahead and use this is for non-continuous text. If, for example, we want to have our Note 1 basis of presentation and our Note 3 going concern as one fact value, we want to skip over this block in the middle, we could do that by having a continuation setting this Note 3 as part of our Note 1. This allows us to make one fact value instead of two, so we can have just one value for that block of text. Now, these examples may not be something you actually want to do. You wouldn't normally want to have Note 1 and Note 3 in the same block, but it's an example of the concept where you would stitch together non-continuous segments of text into the same fact value. A very similar concept to continuations would be exclusions. When you're working with your software for Inline XBRL, you're probably not going to have to decide between them. The software underlying may take care of this for you, depending on what kind of software you're using to do this. But an exclusion actively excludes a block of text from your fact value. So anything within that exclusion, within a tagged block of text, is not considered to be part of the fact value. This is mostly useful for removing formatting, removing page breaks, table of contents links, things that are nice to look at and enhance the document's readability, but really have no bearing on the XBRL and are not part of the tagged information. So this allows us to get rid of that information. So you can see an example of an exclusion. We might have a Note 4 fixed assets text block, and if we want to exclude from that text block our page break, we could just go ahead and mark that with the exclusion block, and that way the page break would not show up in the fact value. This fact value is still going to be visible through the older style Inline XBRL viewer, which is still going to be supported by the SEC, and by any other viewer that's viewing the actual XML data. So these continuations and exclusions, again, do not affect the actual compliance of the document. They just make it look a little bit cleaner in the rendered view. They're not going to change how the instance document looks itself. Transformations are another new concept that's being introduced with Inline XBRL. A lot of the information that's going to appear in your document as you're converting it is going to be in a format that's not exactly XBRL compliant. Things like dates and time, true or false values, ordinal numbers, these are things that make sense to us as humans, but doesn't necessarily make sense to a machine. So we need to translate it into an acceptable format. There is a list of SEC available transformations that can handle values. And there's also a list of default spec transformations that are supplied by XBRL.org. Your software vendor should have transformations available for you in the application to use. So you don't always have to pick exactly which one you want to use, but it's nice to know which ones are available. So let's take a look at why we need these transformations. It's a question I've been asked a couple of times. You don't really need to use transformations with XBRL as it currently is because you do it automatically. If you're handling an XBRL report and you see a duration value of 3 years, 6 months, you would automatically just type it into the XBRL report now in the ISO format of P3Y6M. Or your software would handle that transformation for you behind the scenes. With Inline XBRL, you can't enter it in as that P3Y6M value. It has to be entered in as the as written 3 years, 6 months. So we need some kind of transformation to signify to the XBRL processor behind the scenes that this written out value is indeed equal to the transformed XBRL value. So transformations solve this problem and allow us to accept a wider variety of inputs without having to reformat the way the document looks to match the XBRL data that's being expected. So here's another example of a transformation. If we consider the following sentence that the company purchased 3 oil refineries in the last quarter, the word 3 is a string value. We know it is a numeric fact. It's the value 3. It has to be tagged, but it's a word. It's not an integer value. Therefore, XBRL would reject that if we were to try to just tag it as a word. The SEC has provided a transformation. It's a numword sen, and that's an SEC extension transformation, not one of the default XBRL org transformations. But if you apply that transformation to that word 3, it allows the XBRL processor to understand that this is indeed an integer value, and it is processed correctly behind the scenes and handled correctly. Another example, this one is a little bit less obvious that you have to use a transformation here. But if you have a sentence that needs to be tagged, like the company issued 1,200 shares of stock in the 2018 fiscal year, that number 1,200, it looks like a valid integer value. It's a number, but it has a comma in it. XBRL is expecting only integer values in that input. It can't have anything that's not an integer in that input string. So you would have to use a standard transformation to transform it into an integer value that XBRL is expecting for it to make sense to the XBRL processor. In this case, there is a default transformation from one of the XBRL org specs transformation. It's num comma, which is just meant to handle this where it takes the number and excludes any comma values and makes it into just an integer number. But that transformation would allow you to report that fact correctly. So you're going to need to use an awful lot of transformations as you go through tagging this stuff. A lot of these transformations should be handled behind the scenes. So you won't have to specify, oh, I want to use this transformation here, this transformation there. But it will depend on what software you're using to process the inline XBRL. So if we take a look at how this actually impacts the syntax of our XBRL, you can see we have a basic sentence on September 1st, 2017, the company completed. And that can be expressed as a paragraph tag. And inside of that paragraph tag, you have the code for the non-numeric value. But what we're actually looking at here is the section that's highlighted in red as format. And this is the transform date, month, day, year, end. So that just transforms that September 1st, 2017 value within those non-numeric inline XBRL tags into an actual inline XBRL fact. So the transformation is stated within the inline XBRL tag that's embedded in the paragraph. So it's handled inline. And that just invokes that transformation and converts our sentence, our nice word definition of September 1st, 2017, into the much more XBRL-friendly ISO format of 2017-09-01. Here are some examples of SEC word transformations that are available. So you can see input text. If you were to tag the text 5 years, 2 months, this dir word send transformation would turn it into the output text of period 5 years, 2 months, P5Y2M. It can also handle ordinal words. For 1944 would be output text of 1944. And it can also handle things like the word no and the word none and transform those into zeros. So those are going to need transformations as well. Most facts are going to require some sort of transformation to be handled correctly. There are transformations for dealing with monetary values, transformations for dealing with shares values. Almost everything needs a transformation of some sort. But these are just some specific word transformations. We also have duration transformations. A duration transformation is used to turn numbers directly into a duration of time. The SEC word transformations, for them to work, it requires there to be a word like years or months or something like that for it to understand what is actually being converted and transformed. But a duration transformation doesn't require that. It can transform just a raw number into an actual duration of time. So if we have an example like the loan is repaid over a period of 3 to 5 years, unless we want to restate that to be 3 years to 5 years, the number 3 is going to have to be tagged as a duration using a duration transformation. It doesn't explicitly state that it's 3 years. So we can use a transformation, for example, the SEC extended one dir year to mark it anyway. And that allows us to tag just a number as any kind of duration we want. And the SEC has provided transformations for all of these for years, months, weeks, days, hours. Any number can be transformed into a duration of time using these supplied SEC transformations. So while you're going through doing your inline XBRL, just be aware that depending on the wording around the number, it will have to have different transformations applied to it. So we have a lot of default SEC transformations available. There are 33 transformations available from the XBRL consortium, in addition to the SEC supplied transformations. This covers things like dates, numbers, zero dash information, and this is available at the URL below. But that is the default transformation registry that's supplied. So while we're going through tagging things with transformations, that leads right into hidden facts. Any fact that is visible in an XBRL report must be tagged. So if the number appears in the report, you have to tag it. But that doesn't mean that all the information that's in the report is going to be visible in the report. Some information like CIKs, amendment flags, or any kind of structural data that's required by the XBRL requirements, but is not explicitly required to be in the HTML file is visible, still needs to be in the XBRL report. It just has to be tagged as a hidden fact. And XBRL has a hidden fact section. If we look over here, we can see an example of what that looks like. These hidden facts are embedded in the code of the document, so they're not going to be visible to anyone reviewing it unless you use the SEC's viewer, which has a hidden facts section. But they're all going to be tagged within this IX hidden at the top of the document. So if you tag the amendment flag using your software to do inline XBRL, for example, it should be in a display none style tag. And within that, it's going to have this IX hidden tag. Inside of that, you're going to have all of the hidden facts that are appearing on your document. So this document should have probably multiple hidden facts that would appear in the document entity information. And this example here shows the amendment flag, which is a false value. So this sits at the top. You don't have to look at it. It just needs to be there for the XBRL compliance. Otherwise, the SEC's EDGAR system is going to throw errors saying that you're missing required facts that are needed for compliance. So you can use hidden facts a lot. It makes it very easy to insert data, but they should only be used if you're tagging structural information or information that's required in the report but not explicitly visible. You're tagging fact values, but no transformation exists. The SEC has a lot of transformations available, but if you come across a value and no transformation actually suits the value you want to tag, maybe it's a custom data type or some kind of industry-specific information that doesn't have a transformation available, that's where you can use a hidden tag to tag it. So you would go ahead and mark that as a hidden value. You can also tag fact values that appear in a chart or a graph, like an image. This is mostly dealing with risk return filings, but if you have a gap filing that needs to have these hidden facts tagged, you can go ahead and tag those as hidden facts. Now, it's important that they're not used inappropriately. You can also use hidden facts to do the entire document. I've seen a couple of instances where people are a little happy about putting inline hidden facts everywhere. If the information is visible in the HTML file and a transformation exists for it, it should not be tagged as a hidden fact, even though it might be easier to do so. So it's also really important that when you're tagging documents with inline XBRL, don't use the CSS property display none to hide information without using the XBRL hidden tag. If you do this, the SEC's inline viewer is not going to be able to actually view that. You won't be able to display which facts you're actually looking at. So these are going to be completely hidden if you display them outside of this IX hidden tag. This should be something that your software vendor can help you with, making sure that you're handling hidden facts appropriately. Just make sure that you're not tagging everything as hidden when it shouldn't be. If you do tag things as a hidden fact, the SEC's Edgar system does have a built-in warning system, so you may see Edgar warnings coming back. If you get a warning saying a transformation exists and you have it tagged it as hidden, you should review that fact to make sure you're tagging it correctly. But I think that does it for hidden facts. I'm going to pass it back over to Michelle for some more CPE.
Great, Steve, thank you very much. Yeah, I'm going to share my screen now. Okay. And we're going to go to a couple of CPE questions, and then we'll go to some Q&A. Okay, so let me just bring up our third poll question here. And again, if you have questions, click on the Q&A link at the top of the screen, and we'll take your questions. Oops, I'm sorry, this is the wrong question. Apologies, let me bring up the third poll. Okay. Okay, so the third poll question, which you should be seeing on your screen right now, is continuation tags are designed to do what? Okay, we have three options. First, to provide instructions on how to convert data from a written format to an XBRL format. Or continuation tags are designed to mark a selection of text as not being a part of any fact. Or continuation tags are designed to allow for marking a selection of text as part of a previous block of text. Okay, which answer seems to be the most appropriate? We'll give you another 20 seconds or so to answer this one. Okay, just a few more seconds. Okay, great. I'm going to end the polling now for question 3. Okay, I'm now launching the polling for question 4. Hidden tags should be used when, first option, tagging DEI information that is not explicitly stated in the HTML document, but is required for XBRL compliance. Response number 2, hidden tags should be used when tagging fact values when using a transformation. Or hidden tags should be used when tagging facts that should be visible in the inline XBRL. Okay, about another 30 seconds for this, and then we'll go on to questions. Just another 10 seconds. Okay, I'm going to end the polling here. All right, and we're going to move on to some questions that we've received. The first question is, do we add the hidden tags in the phantom section, like in traditional XBRL?
I can step in and answer that, Michelle. So tagging, by phantom section, I believe you mean the hidden section of the document. You would definitely tag them in a very similar manner to traditional XBRL. The hidden section of the document for inline is going to be just fact values that are disconnected from the actual body of the document. So it should have a similar interface depending on your vendor to insert fact values into it. So yes, you would handle fact values that are in the hidden section similarly to traditional XBRL.
Great, thank you. Okay, another question that I got was, if you were going to give filers advice for the transition, what kind of advice would you think would be helpful? Joe, maybe you want to address that question?
Sure, I can take that. So I guess if I was thinking about inline XBRL and what does it mean for me as the financial reporting manager for my company, what do I need to be concerned about? Because I look at this presentation today and it seems very technical. Isn't my vendor just going to do this in the background? And they're telling me that their software is going to take care of everything for us. Well, That is true to some extent. But at the end of the day, the responsibility for tagging your financial statement rests with the company and not with the software that you use. So what would I tell you to do? Well, the first thing I would ask you to do is to start early to get an understanding of what changes need to be made and who's going to be responsible for making them. So first off, I applaud you for taking part in today's webinar to get a better understanding of it. Most of what we talked about today was very technical. I talked about some things that were changing because of Inline XBRL, and Steve talked about some new things that were, going to be introduced because of the inline tagging. So get involved early, get an understanding of, what are the 5 or 6 things that are going to change in my document and who's going to be responsible for them. Is this something that my vendor software tool will do automatically? Is this something that maybe my vendor will be reviewing and providing some feedback on that I need to make decisions on? Or is this something that I need to go in and I need to understand which of my tagged facts are going to be impacted by something like, say, for example, the transformations? And what do I need to do on each one of those transformations to make sure that when I tag that 1,200 shares, that it's really 1,200 and not 1,200 string. So get an understanding, get started early, understand the division of responsibility between yourself and your vendor. The second thing that I would think about is say, okay, so how does this impact my process? I used to spend a lot of time comparing the rendering to my printed financial statements, and I never really got a lot of value out of that, but I thought it was actually helping me make sure that my XBRL was right. And then I would generate a bunch of reports. Well, is what I'm doing now under the traditional way going to cover all of my risk points when I move to Inline? So one of the things that we talked about with Inline is the transformations. Another is the hidden tags. How do I change my current process or expand my current process to make sure those items are in there? So with the transformations, maybe you can get a report from your software tool that says, here's all the transformations applied in this particular document. Perhaps there's another way of looking at it within the browser or within your tagging software. When it comes to something like, for example, the hidden tags, is there a way that you can go into the iXBRL enhanced browser, you can filter on hidden and you can see all of them to make sure that stuff that is not present in your tagged financials is properly included, and make sure that you either validate it or compare it to the Edgar Filing Manual, Chapter 6, to make sure that they're all properly there. But start to think about where the holes are or where the risk points are in your internal review process, and if there's anything you need to add to that review process. The last one that I would think about is that, we are making some changes to your instance document. There are a couple of new attributes that get added. There's a couple of changes in the tagging. So as you go through this example, I'll put my auditor hat on and say, much like when I transition from one taxonomy to the next year's taxonomy, I should be documenting some of the changes that are made to my instance document. Did I move from an extension to a standard tag? Did I choose a different standard tag because it was available? Did I choose a different method for applying dimensions because a new modeling concept came out? You should be documenting all of those for future reference in case somebody asks you the question of, how and when did your instance document change, who approved it, and how did you test it? Apply that same logic to moving to Inline. What are the changes that are being made to my template for my Q and my template for my K? Are they correct? How do I know they're correct? Who has reviewed and approved them? And how have I tested to make sure that whatever was done to my instance document is correct, is in accordance with the specifications, and actually did get implemented correctly? So those would be my 3 things. One is start early, learn what needs to change, think about how my review process changes, and think about what I need to document in case I come up with a question or if somebody inquires in the future. Thanks, Michelle.
Joe, thanks very much. We have a few more questions. The next question is, will we have to start from scratch for each document we tag? We are currently able to reuse the basic XBRL structure and change text and values.
Yeah, I can hop in and answer that if.
Sure.
So you shouldn't have to start from scratch with each document you tag. This is going to be largely dependent on your software vendor to provide tools to allow you to reuse some of the structural elements. But I can't imagine there will be vendors out there who don't allow you to use anything from the previous document, whether it's copy pasting fact values like the tags from one document to the other, or maybe a wizard to map values from one document to the other. Some sort of tool to move structural information from one document to the other should exist from your vendor. So that's going to be a question you're going to have to ask the individual software providers you're using. But it should not have to be restarted each time from scratch.
Okay, great. The next question, and this is somewhat related, I think, to the rule, but how important is it with the use of inline XBRL that the preferred labels agree to document to the document verbatim in the outline?
Well, this is kind of an important point for me because I tend to look at XBRL from the viewpoint of the consumer of the data. So while you are tagging a value that is in a printed HTML, your first reaction is, well, they could just read this and they could understand it and see what that value represents. The process hasn't changed for a consumer. So if you are one of the data aggregators, or you're the SEC, or you're some big investment bank, say JP Morgan or Thomson Reuters, or one of the data aggregators, you're not going to look at the XHTML document. You're still probably going to consume the underlying XBRL. You're going to consume those individual files and the extracted XML file. So you still need to have those labels accurately represent what that data is. So just because inline is being adopted, it's a nice and pretty and cosmetic view of your data to facilitate the tagging process and to facilitate the review by somebody who isn't consuming massive numbers of XBRL instance files. So remember that at the end of the day, it is still for a machine readable format, and they need to have all the data to properly interpret your values. If you start, say, paying less attention to the preferred labels, you might have somebody's consuming software misinterpret what that data is or misrepresent it in a report that is given to someone who's buying the data from an aggregator.
Thanks, Joe. The next question is, how can I track XBRL changes from draft to draft? And they're wondering if RL has a comparison tool.
Well, I can jump in on that. I'll put my audit hat on. So I work for KPMG and we do audits. And one of the things that we do is we'll compare a instance document from period to period. And there's a variety of third-party software out there that we use. And I'm not advocating you need to go out and buy one. Talk to your vendor first and see what reports that they have. But you could use something like RL, or you could use one of the other third-party programs out there to do a compare of the taxonomy from quarter to quarter, or from year to year if you're looking at a K. You could also do a compare from version to version to say, which values changed from version 3 to version 4. I intended to change these 3 numbers. Did I accidentally change a 4th? I intended to change these attributes. Did I accidentally change something else by accident? I always advocate that, doing some kind of comparison from version to version or quarter to quarter is a good review process step to do to make sure that what you agreed and filed last quarter is what you're starting with this quarter, assuming you've got to add some tags and subtract some tags as well.
Great, thank you. Another question we received, I think this one, maybe Steve, you can take this one. How can I review the precision of facts if the precision is not going to be visible in the inline XBRL viewer? Yeah,
sure. The precision is viewable in the inline XBRL viewer if you actually click on the individual numbers. But to review the precision of the entire document at a glance, you can actually still access the older interactive data format, which shows the entire number with the precision stated for that presentation. So you're going to have the new view in addition to the old view. So you can still review the precision and actual element choices the same way you would have reviewed it previously, but you have a new view additionally to look at things. So you have more options to look at things going forward.
Okay, great, thank you. And another question, does the US GAAP taxonomy change with inline XBRL?
I'll take that one. Not as far as I know. There should not be any changes to the tagging or to the dimensional modeling that's present in the taxonomy. Really, what you're looking at with the adoption of Inline is it's simply the presentation that you're going to look at in your tool and in your viewer. There might be some changes in terms of the attributes. So I know there's a couple, there's one new attribute that's applied to the tag, and we were talking about some of these transformations that may be documented in either the SEC list of transformations or the XBRL.org list. So it really shouldn't be different. I do think there's one new attribute that that gets added to the taxonomy, though.
Okay, and we have one last question. Will the XBRL US, oh, actually, well, we have another question that is specific about the taxonomy, so maybe just to build on that. Will the taxonomy deprecate faster or slower under inline XBRL? I'm not quite sure what that means, but I don't know if...
Absolutely no idea. I'm not sure that one has anything to do with the other. I'm guessing that the deprecation is more of a factor of what new accounting standards are released and what changes are made to the taxonomy by the FASB to the taxonomy advisory group. It really shouldn't impact or be impacted by inline.
Okay, and then one last question. Will the XBRL US data quality rules still apply with inline XBRL? I don't know if either of you want to address that. I'm happy to address it as well.
I can jump in and answer that. Yeah, they should not, they definitely are still going to continue to apply. The inline XBRL doesn't change any of the requirements that currently exist with XBRL. All it does is add a new layer of requirements on top of the existing requirements for displaying it a specific way. You can think of this as just changing how your XBRL looks effectively. It has no bearing on the actual structural underlying XBRL data that is required by the SEC or the Data Quality Committee.
Great, thank you. Well, I want to thank our speakers, Steve and Joe. I really appreciate your time today and your great presentations. We're going to move on to a couple of other, actually, apologize. I'm sharing my screen here. Let's see. A couple of other programs that XBRL US has that I want to make sure that everyone's aware of. Okay. So the Data Quality Committee rules, as I mentioned, I just want to let everyone know that we are up to our 8th rule set, and we've actually just put our 9th rule set out for public review. So I encourage people to go and take a look at our 9th rule set and let us know what you think. I also encourage people to check your filings. You can do it by using any one of these certified applications and services, and you can see which ones are up on the 8th rule set at the time. You can also use our special check your filing tool. So make sure that you use the Data Quality Committee rules to check every filing before you submit it to the SEC. I also wanted to mention, and this is the public exposure period. For the 9th rule set, we have a number of new sets of rules, including element values are equal, dimensional equivalence, inappropriate calculation descendant, negative values, sibling-child relationships, which is a bit of a newer type of rule, and required calculation parent element in the cash flow statement. So please take a look. Please participate in the public review. Everything that you provide us is incorporated and helps to make our rules better. I also want to mention the XBRL API, which I know many of you have been using. This is a way to have access to a lot of XBRL data through our database, both US GAAP data as well as IFRS data. So go on our website and look for XBRL API. Okay, and then I apologize for my slides getting a little bit mixed up here, but I also want to make sure that you were aware of a couple of upcoming webinars that we have. We have on May 15th, we have a webinar on the data quality's 9th rule set public review, and we'll also have a discussion about some of the IFRS findings. What are we seeing in the filings that have been coming in? And then May 29th, we have another webinar on getting successful standards to the finish line. We'll have case studies from Mark Montoya at the FDIC and from Lewis Mathern at the FASB, telling us lessons learned over the past, at this point, like 10 or 15 years of data standards that have been in place for those two organizations. So we hope to see you at those events. Please use the API, please use the data quality rules. And again, thank you so much to Steve Horowitz from NovaWorks and Joe Lushka from KPMG. And hopefully we'll see you on our next webinar. Bye now.